Well, I've been on the record for many years now, very many years actually.
Mm,
The only thing they have, the Western militaries, NATO, is Gulf War 1.0. Period.
mm,
There's nothing more to it. Vietnam was a catastrophe, and it was basically tearing down the American military mythology in Vietnam with the catastrophic consequences. Then we, of
mm,
course, have what? Afghanistan cannot get any more blatant and manifest in terms of failure on primarily strategic and operational level. This is precisely where the wars are won. They are not won on tactical levels.
yeah.
And so the only thing they had was Gulf War 1.0, beating defenseless, Iraqi third-rate army, which didn't do a thing in 6 months, which preceded the so to speak, Desert Storm, when the United States and coalition have been allowed to preposition forces.
Mm,
And in 1992, the chief of the strategy department of the Russian Academy of General Staff, which is, by the way, older than the United States as a country.
yeah.
So here, Mr. Klokotov, Lieutenant General Klokotov, wrote that basically what we saw is anomaly. It cannot be used as any reference or yardstick in terms of real warfare.
Mm,
But this is what they used as the yardstick. This is what they thought they needed to use as their, beating the Turkish shirt against some
mm,
totally inadequate and weak, practically defenseless enemy. And they basically derived everything from there. And
mm,
obviously, then suddenly they started to face the issue of the real combined arms warfare, not understanding that United States never really conducted real combined arms warfare, because everything what they fought after Vietnam was primarily high intensity police operations. What's the point of studying anything in West Point? Granted that nowadays it's academically it's a catastrophe basically. When you have, you just call in close air support, they fly in, F-16 or A-10, it bombs the crap out of whatever is on the front line, you move on. So there you go. And then suddenly you have the situation when you have to consider the fact that you have to face a very advanced forces. And I was warning about it. They don't even understand. For example, in real war, what does it mean if NATO begins to fight Russians willing to commit suicide by the co-op? Um, they don't even have a grasp of the fact that their operational depths will be burning in the first 40 minutes of the assault on Russian troops. They have no
mm,
clue. They have no grasp of it. That, for example, the headquarters on the divisional and corps, let alone army levels, will be found out, detected, identified, and then annihilated. And they will have nothing. They will not be able to do anything about it. We already saw what the NATO air defense is. It is really just butt of the jokes in Russia nowadays, So,
mm,
and they still, I believe, what do? They still assessing the damage to those five patriots, So it's a joke. It's becoming
mm,
a meme now, and the joke basically so, present time joke in Russia is if you want to blow your reputation, just send the equipment to Ukrainians.
yeah.
So, and they commit, of course, war crime, because this is the war crime when they and I'm talking about the primarily Western media. I'm talking about all those advisors and people in the political power place, when they basically throw each day hundreds upon hundreds, they throw thousands to their deaths, basically.
Mm,
That's what Alexander stated in terms of Zaluzhny in whatever state he is,
mm,
So, and
mm,
that it's not just the matter of air support or artillery, for
yeah.
example. It is the matter of armies fight as a system.
Mm,
They fight as a system, they win as a system, they lose as a system. Evidently, there is no understanding of this in Pentagon and London. Those people who are actually planning these so-called operations, and they are desperate now. Apart from the fact they have their jaws dropped on the floor, because most of those people, I can tell you immediately, Most of those people, they don't even understand the role of real air defense, what it is, you know. So look at the air defenses of the NATO armies. It's just laughing stock pretty much, you know. So
I think your point about the fact that the West has never actually carried out successful combined arms warfare, at least not perhaps since the Second World War. Whether they did during the Second World War or not, I don't
yeah, they
actually
did,
know.
they did, yeah.
They did, but I mean, they haven't done anything like that for decades. And they are coming along and telling the Ukrainians, you must conduct combined arms warfare. And we are the people who are going to teach you how it is done. I think this is one of the most appalling things that, from a Western side, that we have seen up to this point. I mean, I think that it's absolutely clear that the combined arms teaching that they provided the Ukrainians, from the way it looks to me, is it weakened the Ukrainians. It actually made Ukrainian military performance worse on the battlefield than it had been previously. The Ukrainians had, I think, from their own experience and history, and possibly what they still had left from the Soviet times, though I think that can be overstated, actually. From what I understand, since 2014, the Ukrainian army has had a clear out of many of its old Soviet trained officers. Yeah. But you know, whatever they had from that left over from that time, it had a much clearer and better understanding of combined arms war than what the West was telling them to do. What the West apparently was telling them to do was to advance with their tanks into minefields.
Well, I am on the record. I'm not sure though it applies anymore because the most of the command core of the armed forces of Ukraine have been annihilated. Yeah. But even half a year ago, the average Ukrainian company commander could have gone to Sandhurst or West Point and would teach those colonels and major generals a lot about the armor warfare. And there is another thing. What we have to understand, while certainly Pentagon, due to its ISR complex and due to involvement of in England too, due to involvement of MI6 and CIA directly into the issue of the decision making on the armed forces of Ukraine part, they obviously have still very limited picture because if you look attentively at the media and even very many those people, so-called professionals who are supposed to be in the know, they still drink this Kool-Aid from the Ukrainian side. Even granted that they have a decent, they can get some telemetry from the, from the battlefield. They fly all those global hawks and other things, just to, get whatever the signal intelligence, but still they do not have even 10% of the clear picture, because what really matters here are war correlates. Russians do have those war correlates, because if you come up with something which is politically correct and you want to suck up to the some kind of the higher ups in the combat conditions, you will be cooked or toast in a minute. So in this particular case, Russian information flow through and through, from tactical through strategic level, is very free flow and very good flow. And when you look at the performances, and as I already stated, it brings us back. I mean, what can possibly any colonel of the U.S. Army can teach the guy on the front line of the armed forces of Ukraine? And again, I'm not disclosing any secret. And I understand I made this caveat pretty much clear to everybody for a number of months now, that I certainly do have some corporate, unity with people who are, in armed forces all over the place, be them, British, American, or what have you, Chilean for. They are supposed to be the military professionals. But now I have to admit that I don't see many professionalism on the American military part. I'm not talking about these clowns like Petraeus or what have Keen and whatever those indeed clowns show from this neocon think tank, Institute for Misunderstanding the War, or whatever, Institute for Study the War. I mean, they don't study anything there. They have no access to reliable information, except for what they get from CIA or what their connections in Washington. But most of it is the Ukrainian propaganda. And of course, many of them believe themselves that they are really great. But again, Petraeus wouldn't be allowed to command battalion in the Russian army. And the point is that in Russia right now, it's, if you look attentively at the media, and many professionals say, many, not all, but many, they say they're cowards. They're hiding behind their proxy because they know if once they go, it's just like bring it on, And because Russians can calculate, Russians can operationally plan, and they did it for many, many decades. And then you suddenly have the situation, as my friend, a really good Russian political observer and economist, Alexander Roger, says, they don't have operational planning. They have business plan. That's the only thing they have. They never knew what it is, the real 24/7 operation, when you have the attrition, when you have the different configuration of the forces due to the attrition, due to the actions of the enemy. What kind of planning was Gulf War I? Oh yeah, let's point the target, let's blow it. Okay, next. And so no real defense, no real resistance, nothing. And then suddenly you have the situation, if you're some, let's say, a brigadier general or chief of staff of the corps or commander of the division, you are not safe on the modern battlefield. Even no matter how you dig yourself into the ground, if it will not be some Onyx or 3M14 caliber getting you, it will be a Kinjal which will get you. That's the whole point. Those people still cannot grasp this reality of the modern field, of which I've warned for many years. You don't understand what you're getting yourself into. My friend, very good friend, and he is very famous military reporter in Russia. He reports for the Channel 1 or Russian public television, and he's constantly on there. You can find him. Marat Khairulin. He is not professional military, but let me tell you, he can go and teach in the U.S. War College, U.S. Army War College, anything about combined arms warfare. And he's embedded with Slavyanka Brigade. And he talks to people, obviously, on not only tactical, but operational level too, constantly. And his reports from military point of view are extremely literate. He explains the difference between, for example, tactical issue and operational issue, of course. That is why, for example, we've been talking for, I don't know, a long time, many months about Wagner, and people even on my channel says, oh, you never praise them, you never, you say, well, yeah, we knew what they were up to and what they were doing because, well, it's the military professional level, how you describe this. This is not to say that Russia doesn't have its blemishes. Obviously, majority of the bloggers, so-called, it's called, they are a disaster, as are pretty much most media in the West in this respect. But then again, don't forget, they have a vested interest, they need subscribers, and they need monetization. So they sell all kinds of the fairy tales, including sometimes issues which go contrary to the general policies and plans of Russian military political top. So, but other than that, for the most part, yes, you will have a very different level of reporting. And don't forget, there is another thing. Most Russian men, most, not all, even today, they go through the military service. They go through the military service, which is obligatory. They call it the conscripts. Well, some are conscripts, others are professionals. And so even conscripts, after the year, now it will be 2 years back to Soviet norms, so to speak, of their armed service, so which is mandatory. They know at least basic weapon systems. They know how the squads and platoons operate generally, let alone that. But for the most part, we're looking at the primarily ground element. There are obviously issues such as Navy or Air Force is, air defense. They are highly professional, and there are very little conscripts there, if any. So most of those people there are contract people, they are professionals. So, and yes, that the obviously the level of reporting is dramatically different, the same as level of the grasp on the even basic public level is different, of course.
Absolutely. Can I just say, I mean, when I said reporters, I want to make it very clear. I'm talking about Russian war reporters. Bloggers are a completely different group of people. I mean, there are one or two who are pretty good, but some of them are awful.
Yeah, most of it is.
And you've got to be very, very careful
Yeah.
running them. And in fact, some of them, by the way, I noticed that the Western media sometimes quotes them when it's convenient.
Yeah, they use it's propaganda. The only
Yeah.
thing Western media can do is PR. And it's the fact is, even those military professionals, so to speak, what they leak, quote unquote, to U.S. or Western media, it is so unprofessional. It's so risible. They cannot even construct their professional enough lie to sell it. It's just downright hack job. Many people, especially who went through the military, training, they look at it and they laugh at it. It's just ridiculous. And as I already stated, I have to admit there is a lot of loss of respect to Western militaries in Russia right now. It used to be that, hey, they may not be as good as they say, but they are still forced to be reckoned with. Now they say, yeah, they're still forced to be reckoned with, but my God, these are people just like a circus, really. And in many respects, they are correct. And again, those people do not understand what modern warfare is.
Andrei, I'm going to ask you to explain two concepts that you just cited, but you talked about tactics and you also talked about something called operations. And that does seem to be a distinctive Russian concept. Can you perhaps provide some explanation of this for our viewers? I mean, I've been reading a lot about this recently and I find it extremely interesting. And it goes directly to that point about, not being too worried about, whether 50 meters here or there, you're advancing here or there. Can you explain this difference?
Well, it's actually a German-Russian thing. Yeah. But don't forget, in 1812, we had Karl von Clausewitz, who was attached to, for example, Russians, even at the Battle of Borodino. So you had a lot of Prussian people, so to speak, hanging around the Russian army, which fought and defeated Napoleon. For example, Clausewitz was frustrated that he wasn't allowed anywhere near the tactical units, of Russian army. So, but eventually Germans, based on Russian campaign, and many Russians too, concluded that, well, you know what, strategy is fine, tactics is fine. What is in the middle? How you basically shuffle, how you correct, command and control all those regiments, let alone divisions. And then suddenly you begin to have this unifying concept, a unifying link between tactics, which is how your unit fights, it's how your battalion fights, how your regiment fights. And then suddenly you cannot go to the strategy, because you can lose a battalion and you're still going to win strategically. You're going to win the campaign. You're going to win the war. And war, obviously, strategic level of war is not just defeating enemy per se. Of course it is, but it is achieving political goals of war. Tactics doesn't achieve political goals of war. It's not nowhere near. But they surmised at that time, Germans and Russians, that, hey, actually the victory is won not on a tactical level. It is won on the strategic level, and something which is close to it, which ties together those operations of battalions, regiments, and how they run and how they operate. And then eventually, so from 19th century, this concept started to develop, and Russian general staff, of course, started to develop it in the profound depth. And by the World War II, in terms of operations, there were like two parts. There is an operations per se, which is calculable, accessible in terms of the probabilities of the required force which is needed, for example, in some sector or some strip of land, or depending on how Lanchester, of course, Mr. Lanchester and Osipov came up in 1915 with what is called theory of operations. And suddenly, in this theory of operational research, you can predict some things, especially when you deal with the attrition models, and things of this nation. And suddenly you'll say, oh, you know what? We have combat effectiveness of this. Remember Napoleon stating that sometimes division fights as a battalion, sometimes battalion fights as a division, because of the spirit of the esprit de corps, combat training and things like that. And suddenly all this started to go in mathematically. And then you recognize that, if you have, let's say, a regiment of Mujahideen in Afghanistan, or something which is similar in number, let's say 1,000, Mujahideens, what will the, let's say, company of the highly trained and well-armed and supported by air group of paratroopers do? Company of paratroopers do? Okay, in terms of combat effectiveness, they could be equal to this regiment. And this is theory of operations. This is how it's calculated. This is how operations are planned. But the operational art is called art for a reason. While operations is a very hard science, operational art is my enemy knows what I'm going to be doing. They have the same mathematical apparatus. They have the same approach to pretty much calculating things. How will I actually outthink my enemy? And that when it becomes operational art. That is why it's called art, because it stops being just merely hardcore science. It is hardcore science in the framework of the basically art, how I outthink, outmaneuver my enemy. And that starts obviously in the larger scheme of things on the levels of divisions, Army Corps, armies, and whole armed forces. And then suddenly you are dealing not only with the tactical issue, where whatever your platoons and companies and battalions do and operate on the ground is the fact how your brigade, or let alone division, by the way, which in the Russian armed forces, division is operational tactical force already. Brigade, for example, is purely tactical, but division is already operational tactical. And then the higher you go, army is already strategic operational, so because this is the set of the goals they can solve. And operational art and operation fit right in the middle between tactics and strategy. And this is what it becomes the flow of those three important components. They operate vertically. They operate simultaneously with each other. They interact, top, bottom up. And it's extremely important to understand how it is done. But what kind of operational art you need to from people? If you look at the Pentagon, those people who plan those operations for Ukraine, they use cliches. They don't know anything like that. And apart from the fact that they now are just basically have no way back, the only thing that is left for them is to run those poor conscripts, many of those people, of the armed forces of Ukraine to a certain depth. And let me make another point. Why I'm beginning to talk about war crimes. Pentagon, Minister of Defense of United Kingdom, MI6, CIA are well aware of the practice of execution and torture of those people in armed forces of Ukraine who do not want to go and kill themselves. And they have the literally hedge detachments. They shoot them in the back if they try to surrender to Russian side. This is war crime. And guess what? It's coming up in the real war crime tribunal and crimes against humanity, which is being set up now with the participation of the Russian Investigative Committee and Russian Duma in Moscow and in Donetsk. My God, when this thing starts, we will hear so many names of not Russian or Ukrainian origin, which will be stated there for people who commit this crime. And so you can see every day the number of the KIAs from the armed forces of Ukraine, and they catch people, sometimes 65, 70-year-old people on the streets and drag them into the army. General Staff of Russian Armed Forces, is the main organ of the combat control, command and control of the armed forces of Russia. And most what they do planning. They plan 24/7, 365, depending on the change of the overall strategic and operational situation. And the core of the Russian General Staff is GO. It's GOU or GO, Main Planning Directorate. It's Главное оперативное управление. This is the heart of it. This is the thing which plans the whole military thing, whatever it is, be that some kind of the police action, like it was in Kazakhstan, for example, which was the peacekeeping and police action of the Union of the former Soviet republics with the combined forces, or be it now, which is many people, I want to stress again, and this is what people have to understand, Russia still doesn't fight the war. Russia fights special military operation. You do not want Russia to begin to fight the war, believe me, because it's gonna be this level of violence turned to 11, okay? Because totally different paradigm, totally different planning will go, and guess what? This will be General Staff which will be doing this planning and basically conducting that, what amounts to combat, control of the armed forces of Russia. And for example, war has very different requirements. And by the way, it is also the document which is written by, and you guessed it, General Staff. Some of it departments or directorates which do deal with all kinds of things, ranging from the PSYOPs to intelligence, like GRU, which used to be GRU, main intelligence directorate, to planning, to ground forces, to Navy, to what have you, and it all subordinated, completely subordinated to the military doctrine, which is developed by, and you have guessed it, General Staff, and adopted by the Russian political top, and signed into the law and into the doctrine by the President of Russian Federation, who is also a Supreme Commander. And guess what? This is this vertical which works constantly between each other, communicates completely with each other, including through the Minister of Defense, who is obviously, whose first deputy is, of course, Chief of the General Staff of Russian Federation. In this particular case, we know that the Defense Minister is General of the Army Shoigu, and his first deputy and Chief of the General Staff is General of the Army, Mr. Gerasimov. This is how it's done. The whole thing is subordinated into this vertical structure whose only task, quoting Clausewitz, is to compel the enemy to do our will, the main object of war. They plan it in complete accordance to the national interest as expressed by the political top of Russian Federation for Russia. And that's the fundamental difference. That is why, and this system, as you might understand, requires an incredibly high intellectual, military academic level. And obviously you need to, let me put it this way, the Academy of General Staff in Russia, it's a legendary institution. You may not know, but before 2014, there were a number of NATO officers who were visiting it and studying it, obviously under their apart from classified things, but they were introduced to the courses in military history and staff work and planning, as was done by Russians for centuries, essentially. And guess what? There were many American officers, British officers, there were Japanese officers, there were all kinds of officers from, and this is what General Staff does. And if I hopefully explain that in the most simplest form, so to speak. So, and yeah, there is another thing, of course, which is, of course, the center of the combat control of the armed forces of Russia. You already saw it probably on YouTube or on TV. It's a state-of-the-art, almost Star Wars type facility which is one huge, gigantic screen and computers all over there with the officers, operators sitting in their terminals. And of course, there is a classified, non-public part of it. I would say, you know what? Probably we're talking about the almost holographic battlefield representation there, something like the Star Wars. Remember Death Star? So you probably have this 3D thing unfolding depending on that, because Russia operates fully in the network-centric paradigm, and this is another thing which NATO obviously didn't expect. So.
From a Russian perspective, this structure that you've described at the tactical level, it actually, if anything, encourages initiative, or at least that is how Russians understand it.
Let me put it this way. All Western militaries after the World War II have been shaped by Wehrmacht. They were taught and instructed by the defeated Wehrmacht. So as a result, they bought, you know, and swallowed hook, line, and sinker all this BS from German generals who, as we know, they lost the freaking war. So, but the West decided under the pretext that, oh, Russians do not provide any information, you know, and all of it is propaganda. Well, sure, but they started learning from people like, oh, good God, Erich von Manstein. For some reason, they have this exaggerated, completely grossly out of proportion admiration for Rommel, who militarily is not that significant. He was never even in the same league as Walter Model, for example, or let alone Guderian or Manstein. But hey, they wanted it. And guess what? I'm quoting here, not myself. It's not my opinion. Basically, it's the opinion of the cadre American officers and the military historians with the international repute, Colonel David Glantz and Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan House. They talk about it. The whole thing was shaped by this BS, German BS about tactic, whatever the German name for it, like, oh yeah, let's do this initiative in the overall concept of the Blitzkrieg, and you know, Russians are like robots, they go there and you know, so and they go where they said to go, they have no initiative, as if the war is fought that you go where you want to go. You probably Wagner experience is a good demonstration of that you don't do those things. You end up killing 70% of your personnel. But point is, and they believed that. They literally believed that. If not for David Glantz, Colonel, at that time, he organized Department of the Slavic Military Studies in the General Staff and Command College in the Leavenworth, Kansas, of the U.S. Army. If not for him, they would still be learning those campaigns that based basically, oh yeah, we lost the war. We got our ass kicked at Stalingrad. We got our ass kicked at Kursk. We got the Group Army Center destroyed completely during, Bagration offensive. And then, yeah, we lost Berlin. But no, we're still good. We're still better than those damn Russians. And that's where this idiotic myth comes that Russians basically piled bodies, you know, to get to Berlin, while in reality the military ratio was 1 to 1.3 in favor of Germans, you know. So it's hardly, piles of bodies if you look at the intensity of the war. But they bought it and they believed it. And now they have this propaganda and mythology of their military power being basically destroyed as we speak. Every day, every single day that happens. And they don't know what to do. Because obviously very few people in the U.S. Army, those who went through the Department of the Slavic Military Studies, which then was by David Glantz, and they still issued this magazine of the Slavic military studies. It's not as good anymore as it used to be, but they still try. Some of them learned about deep operations of the Red Army during World War II, but primarily it is the hubris, it is the arrogance, which have been multiplied many times after this easy beating the crap pretty much from the defenseless enemy. And they believe that they have the yardstick. They don't. They never did to start with. And Afghanistan showed it beautifully. In Iraq, it's really pathetic, honestly. And then suddenly they're basically having this, how to say it, lesson on the combined arms warfare against the best proxy United States ever had. Fact is, at the start of the 24th of February 2022, Ukrainian armed forces were the strongest armed forces in the rest of the Europe. Much stronger than the Bundeswehr, much stronger than the French armed forces, let alone British armed forces. They were the strongest army in the Europe, stronger than Turks even, which is the second largest force. And yet, look at them now. It's a third iteration which is being annihilated. And people say that, the kill ratio is horrifying. Sometimes it's 1 to 10. Sometimes, like in some tactical or operational axis, it can reach up 1 to 17. And they don't teach that in U.S. military academies.
Very well. But what has been the actual role of Wagner in this war? What role has it actually played?
Extremely negative. Extremely negative, despite the fact that many of people in Wagner who fought there were obviously people with the heroic, professional, and things of this nature. But it was, again, we have to roll back to half a year ago, even more. And why, for example, I and my friends, it's all over Russian internet, me and Marat Khairulin and Vladimir Trukhan of the Central Apparatus of Ministry of Defense. So all kinds of, military and real military reporting professionals. We're talking about it for many months now. Everything starts from Bakhmut. But even we have to roll back even further back. 2018, Larry Johnson, my friend, wrote an excellent piece about this. You probably remember the moment when in 2018, there was a U.S. Air Force bombed the bejesus from some forces over the Red Line, which was established between Russian and American forces in Syria. What many people forget, that part of this group, which was following some Syrian warlord into the Kurdish territory, was about oil and making money. And there was the Wagner there, which went there completely on the decisions made by the so-called, used to have this body, Council of Commanders, and it was Mr. Prigozhin who wanted more money. And they attached themselves to the Syrian warlord, crossed the river. Americans called Russians on the deconfliction line, says, hey guys, are there any your guys there? And Russian military command says, no. They say, okay, so we'll deal with this. Russians say, hey, go right ahead. Americans, take their aircraft into the air, bomb the crap out of these people. And then it turns out that it was a lot of it were Wagner. They lost, some people say 20, others say 80. We don't know now. But they're in tens, of the Wagner group. And basically, the rumor has it that Prigozhin has been so upset. He started, just basically signaling to Shoigu, defense minister, the guy who actually signs the contracts, to those Wagner groups, and pays their salaries. And their response was, guys, don't play Napoleon, you don't know what you're dealing with here. But Mr. Prigozhin, being the former prisoner and robber, and man of very low moral qualities. And by the way, for everybody to know, which I am on the record for many months, he doesn't know Putin. He searched him once, had 2 photos with him, and he was selling those photos as if he has connection to Putin. Putin didn't even know who Prigozhin was. And that's the thing. This is all PR, including a huge number of the bloggers and Concord Group PR machine, which was promoting Wagner. But go back to Bakhmut. Wagner being a contractor of the Ministry of Defense and being nothing more than the Storm Group. There were 12 battalions, and these were primarily people with the light and medium-sized weapons, whose task was to take some, urban centers And they were pretty good, more or less, at some point of time. But then, of course, while this conflict develops, and Mr. Prigozhin obviously has sour grapes for many years from Mr. Shoigu and others who tell them, guys, don't go there. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Go and do your thing, being what is the private military company. They signed the contract for the special military operation, which at that time got them basically the sector. Here's the near Bakhmut, hold the line. Hold the line. And while we were dealing with Bakhmut itself, just keeping it open as a trap and steady meat grinder for Ukrainian forces. But no, Mr. Prigozhin decided that, let me show you those losers from Russian army. The same Russian army which provided air support, intelligence, artillery, tanks, to this Wagner group. He said, let's go and take Bakhmut on our own. And guess what? In full violation with the contract and in full violation with the orders, they go, drag themselves into Bakhmut, meet immediately stiff resistance. And this is when the start of their recruiting of the prisoner people started. Well, guess what? Instead of glory to Bakhmut, they immediately made sure, even if they did it on purpose, but because of their involvement into the Bakhmut, number of at that time, which was half a year ago, number of crucial units and supplies and resources have been withdrawn by Russian Defense Ministry and General Staff. And Prigozhin hates Gerasimov to support those guys now who got into the, really bad situation, and suddenly you need to cover their flanks. How do you do this? Well, of course, you start moving Russian paratroop units, Russian rifle units. They stick around their flanks, not to allow them to be surrounded. And guess what? This immediately slows down operations on other operational axes, for example, Kupiansk axis. What do you think? Was Gerasimov and Shoigu happy? No. In fact, there was a very serious situation with the discussion of Wagner already then within Russian armed forces. Well, now the numbers are available. They lost during their out of the prison population, which was given 3 weeks training by Prigozhin and his council of commanders. 70% have been casualties. This is a slaughter, basically. And of course, he didn't capture Bakhmut until Russian army got involved. But while this was happening, obviously, Shoigu and Gerasimov had enough with him. And he was told, there will be no more contracts for you. You're done. And that's what precipitated this desperate act of man who completely lost, touch with the reality. He is absolutely not military man. He has zero, basically, military background. His council of commanders, while many of them were indeed military professionals, many of them, despite the fact that they had a combat history, for example, even in Chechnya or in Syria, this, of course, has nothing to do with the scale and scope of special military operation. And some people there, due to greed, a sheer ambition and ego, they went bananas. And guess what? You already saw the result of this. And the only reason Putin went this way is because he didn't want to kill that many people, many of whom have been duped pretty much out of Wagner. And by the time they started the second day of this, already clear, there were Akhmat forces surrounding Rostov. And this it's so pathetic. But what they achieved, that Putin ratings went from 80% to 90%. So that was the result of recruiting the prison population, because they started reporting horrendous losses.
Yes.
They were literally throwing those guys, and they were just slaughtered there.
In purely military terms, where are we going?
I think that Russian position now is extremely strong, extremely strong, actually. and there was never doubt that there will be any different outcome. We need to understand that Russia sitting in their strategic defense position does not preclude offensive actions.
No.
For example, many people do not notice this again, but Russia is back around Kupiansk.
Yeah.
So, I mean, nobody reports it, but hey, it's just actually a large arrow there, you know, and the Russians are already there. But Russia is feeling comfortable here because, do not forget, it's what I stated. A general staff of the military organization has a huge political wing to it, so to speak, which actually interacts with the political top. And what people say, did Russia foresee the volatility in Europe as it's happening now? Yes, it did. In other matter, it could have been different in terms of details, but there was no doubt that SMO puts a drain, basically, on the not only military-industrial complexes of NATO, but it also puts a drain, political drain. It actually undermines the regimes which actually run the European Union and the United States, essentially. And for this matter, this is a great point for Russians to sit now in strategic defense, annihilate the remnants of whatever is left from the armed forces of Ukraine. And we all know it's the third iteration there. And each day, if you look even just from the first phase, it's if you don't achieve anything the first 10-15 days during offensive, you're done. Your offensive is cooked. But they didn't even break through the what is called supply front line. They didn't even reach the first line of defense, and they already have been destroyed. And when you look at it from starting from the June 4th, I believe they lost, armed forces of Ukraine, another 22,000 KIAs. So multiplied by 2, roughly, it's the same number of wounded. And so the third iteration, they called about talk about second phase. Let it come. Second phase, the result will be even more dramatic. And after that, we'll see, because there is a lot of political change going on right now in the world, and especially Western world. And do not forget, it all happens in full parallel with the activity on BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, OPEC. This is all tied together. It is the fundamental strategy of the state. And this is in a full Clausewitz way that, you know what, the object of any war is to compel the enemy to do our will. Russia is doing just that, with military part of it being obviously very huge, but still just the part of it. And do not forget, even Ukraine is not the end of it. We have other front line in Syria still. We have other events happening all over the world. Don't let me go into the naval part of it. It's a whole other story altogether.
Yeah.
Especially Russian shipbuilding program. And then we have China. So when you look at this, you begin to understand that, why take out the knife from the wound when you can continue to keep the knife in the wound and rotate it periodically there, you know? And this is what happens. And because Russian losses have been relatively light, you know, there are more people dying, you know, in Russia from alcoholism and, traffic problems a year than what Russia lost, you know, so far. And when you look at this is, it's a good thing to continue. But at some point of time, definitely don't forget, we need to know if Poland will be stupid enough to commit suicide. And there is another 500,000 Russian troops which haven't been introduced yet. They are well trained now, extremely well supplied, and they're standing behind the lines, waiting for what? Well, I can tell you, the main contingency is if NATO decides to go bananas. If it decides to go bananas, then good God.
Yeah. But in the sort of intermediate level of leadership, where the decisions, most of the real decisions are actually made there. They're not made at the very top. I think people are profoundly shocked. I think that they are shocked by the fact that the offensive has been so unsuccessful. They're shocked at the level of losses that Ukraine taking. They may not have the full picture about them, but they're starting to get a sense of that.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that's really, really spooked them, and something that they didn't expect or understand, there are two things, or anticipate. One was that Russia would outproduce them in military equipment. I mean, that is something that was completely beyond their reckoning or understanding. And the second was that the economic war, which they thought would end Russia, is now starting to look like it might end them, in the sense that, I mean, there's now talk about a gold-backed BRICS currency being on the horizon and being the main topic of discussions in South Africa when the BRICS countries meet, because we have all of these meetings coming. We have the meeting in Vilnius, which is not already, the divisions are there. Stoltenberg has just been reappointed NATO Secretary General because they can't agree on anyone else. That's the only reason. As I understand it, people don't even like Stoltenberg very much, even
No, the
within
guy
NATO.
is. I don't remember any NATO leader who was competent.
No,
I remember Lord Robertson at some point of time.
I remember him very well.
Yeah. Oh God. And I wrote it in one of my books.
Yeah.
The guy was doing the war gaming with some leaders of future leaders of NATO, you know, those kids from universities, and they were discussing how to deal with the Crimean Bridge, and also how moving the Navy to deal with that into the Black Sea. You read this and like, dude, if you think that you can, apart from the fact that Turkey obviously will not allow it, but there is another issue there. You get your ships into the Black Sea with the attempt to do something against Russia directly. They're not return. They're not going to go back. There will be nothing to go back. They will be all sunk. And yet they were still playing this as if, you know. And you look at this, it's like, good God, people, they are. But hey, listen, I wrote the third book. I'm writing the fourth book. Jesus Christ, look at these elites. Yeah. Many of them are morons, literally. And it's not like they're projecting them. They are morons. They are complete morons. They have now this Richard Haas, the globalist, and, you know, who is retiring from the Council on Foreign Relations. My question is, show me anyone there in Council on Foreign Relations, all those military and diplomatic, you know, professionals from high level who can talk subject matter on the real international relations, real economy. For them, many of them, as you, Alexander, correctly stated, I know for some in Pentagon, it's just absolutely cognitive dissonance. Russia produces smart munitions, high precision munitions, several times more than combined West altogether. I'm talking about high precision munitions, you know, all those laser GLONASS guided things, you know, just all those things of this nature. And they still cannot, like, that's why for now, 10 months, Russia is running out of missiles. Yeah. It's like, sure. Yeah, it's like, and now you have the guys from, I believe, Newsweek a couple of days ago were like, oh no, CSIS, like, why Russia will not run out of missiles. Yes. Really? Welcome to the party, pal. You know, it's a coping. Coping, it's a coping. And this is like, again, everybody saw what happened to the best United States can provide. It's the Patriot Pack-3. It's a goner, you know, and they were complaining that Russians use the fake targets. Hello, pals, this is war. This is how you fight war. You fake things, you know. You send fake targets. You allow you to, use your part of your combat load on them. And then, bang, you have the either Kinjal arriving or, you know, caliber. That's it. That's how you fight the war. Yes. And they still cannot understand this. And again, the worst thing which could have happened to them was, of course, Gulf War. They truly begin to believe that, oh my gosh, we're so good. You're not. Yeah. And that's the whole thing. And that completely poisoned the doctrinal development, that completely poisoned the political level of the United States, which still
Yes.
think, I quote General Latif, my favorite quote of General Latif, Major General Latif, PhD in physics, 20 years at DARPA. And he writes in his book, and I quote, most of what American public and political elite know about the war is from the entertainment, from Hollywood. This is what they know. You cannot explain some political scientist who is now senator what it means, what those things mean, what those weapon systems mean, how they operate, tactically, how they have the impact operationally or strategically. They have no clue. Those couple hour seminars, or what is the Congressional Research Service does to them, they probably don't even read it.